I'm sure that most of our distinguished guests here tonight will have already been to the exhibition. I know some have been 2 and even 3 times, because there's quite a lot to take in. And some of you would have been there tonight with Chris. So just to welcome you all to this event, and in particular to thank the British Museum for mounting this really wonderful opportunity to reflect on the memory of people's memories of Nelson Mandela, and to recognise the South African High Commission, Sisanda Lisa, and I believe the Deputy High Commissioner is with us tonight, so a very warm welcome and thanks to the High Commission for co-sponsoring this event tonight. So, to observe protocols, lords, ladies, and distinguished guests, it's my great pleasure to introduce this extremely distinguished panel that we have with us tonight. But before I do that, I would like to recognize some people in the audience, and I know it's a very dangerous practice, and I'll have to ask the forgiveness of those that I'm not recognizing. And I'm quite sure that there are very few people in this auditorium whose lives have not been affected in some way by Nelson Mandela and his memory, even those who were not fortunate enough to get to meet him personally. His life had an extraordinary impact throughout. So we have here tonight in the audience Sir Nicholas Stadlin, a retired British High Court judge who's become, let me not say a late midlife expert in the Rivonia trial. He spent the last 3 years doing interviews with all of those connected to the Rivonia trial. He's spent a year at Oxford researching a book about Bram Fisher, who headed the legal team, and so we very much welcome him. Sir Michael Bear, the former Lord Mayor of the City of London, and Lady Barbara, who's with him. They have a strong connection to South Africa. In fact, that's where they met and got married. And Sir Michael spent some time there. Anne Page, who's one of the honorary consuls of South Africa, the South African High Commission. And a very warm welcome to Sally Sampson, the widow of the late Anthony Sampson, who was certainly one of my journalistic mentors and who wrote the authorized biography of Mandela. A warm welcome to you, Sally. And also to Dr. Dora Thornton, who I was privileged enough to work with and assist on the wonderful exhibition that she curated on Shakespeare Staging the World back in 2012 with the year of the London Olympics. And as you will hear tonight, there's a strong connection on the panel with the collected works of Shakespeare, which was circulated on Robben Island in the 70s. So to come to the panel, I do have a lot of memories of Nelson Mandela, and I'm not going to steal the time of the panel at this point, because we've got a lot to get through tonight, but I will try and feed in some of those memories as I introduce speakers and when we have our question and answer time. I think what I would like to say before I introduce the panel is that the epic story of Mandela's life and the impact that he had on people, on the South African nation, on the people of South Africa, and indeed on the world. It is such an epic story that nobody's really been able to embrace the whole story. It's almost impossible. Yes, there have been movies, there's been the Long Walk to Freedom, there's been Invictus, and there's been a number of other films, one on Robben Island, and they all tell part of the story, but the story is huge. But what we can tell, what every individual can tell, is the personal story, the little pieces of how Mandela affected their lives. And we are going to have a lot of people that are going to want to tell those stories tonight, and I'm going to do my absolute best to ensure that as many of you who would like to speak would. But before that, we we have a lot to get through. I happen to be, by a complete fluke of history, the first person to shake Nelson Mandela's hand when he came out of prison, mainly through ignorance that I didn't know I wasn't allowed into the prison grounds, and I was wearing a sort of a slate blue suit, which looked rather like the police suits, and I arrived very late at Pollsmoor, and my head was so swimming with the sense of awe and history that day. I sort of walked in, the next thing I found myself standing next to the poor unfortunate Clarence Caker from the SABC, who had not prepared for the fact that he was going to have hundreds, millions of viewers to talk to for an hour, and his ad-libbing sort of ran out a few times. But I sort of stood quietly at a tap, and when that sight of Mandela walking down with Winnie Mandela and the entourage, time stopped, and he headed over in my direction with a broad smile, and we had that magic handshake. So that is one of my memories. I was a correspondent at that time for the Christian Science Monitor, and I'll tell one more, and then I'll get on to the panel. The Christian Science Monitor is, for most people, quite an obscure paper, and people tend to think it's religious, but in fact it's a secular paper that was founded by the Christian Science Church at the turn of the century. And it's one of the few papers that Mandela was able to read in prison. And when he came out, and he went on that first trip to America, when he was, before he became sort of captive of his minders, he headed off one day. It was a nightmare for the security people. They didn't know he was going. He had just researched where the headquarters of the Christian Science Monitor were in Boston. He headed off with these guys with sort of dark glasses at his side. And I received a call from my foreign editor who said, she was almost speechless. She said, "You won't believe it. I'm looking out of the window," because there's a big sort of a rectangular lake down at the bottom, Christian Science Monitor headquarters. I'm looking down the window, and standing at the door is Nelson Mandela. And it was entirely his initiative. It was not on the program. He wanted to go and see and recognize the team that produced the paper that he'd been reading for the past 27 years. And this is the measure of the man. So that's enough from me for the moment. Many more. I did probably about a dozen interviews with Mandela over the time that he was, to the 4 years that he was before he became president, and then the 5 years after he became president. And after that, I didn't have that much journalistic contact. But we have people on the panel like John Carlin, who certainly did. And I had the privilege of sitting next to him, and I've never felt more at a loss for what to say sitting next to somebody. And he would always break the ice and ask one about oneself, and he would focus on you, and you felt that he was solely focused on you. For instance, Doe Steyn, who's one of the sort of South African billionaires in the insurance industry, who had a huge mansion of a house which he handed over to Mandela after he came out of prison, to when he needed time to think, because Mandela complained the one thing that he really had difficulty dealing with when he came out was that he no longer had that time to think. They had an extraordinary time to think while on Robben Island, to think and to plan and to debate and to discuss everything. And Doe Steyn had a tribute evening for Mandela. It was an evening, I have to say, of excess. There were amazing canopies on silver platters and ambassadors and celebrities, and there was kind of in the middle there was a kind of a glass gazebo where the close friends were allowed to go. And Denise and I were allowed into this gazebo at some point, and his opening remark was, "How did he propose to you?" Now, so he would always swing it around onto one, and so you weren't at a loss of what to say. Because one of the things he said that night was, one of the most difficult things is not to change society, but to change yourself. And that to me is the essence of Mandela's extraordinary power to transform people. So even with the forgiveness thing and the focus on the humanity of people, there was another quote where he said, that however ordinary you might think somebody is, as soon as you start talking to them and engaging them, you find that everybody is actually an extraordinary human being. It's just that you have to get past that limit. And that, I believe, didn't come entirely from a calculated effort, although it certainly suited his focus on the goal, the political goal that he had. But it came through his own transformation that took place in those 27 years. And Sally, who spoke earlier, will bear me out that Anthony Sampson, who knew him before and after the Rivonia experience and the prison, were astonished by the man who came out of prison in comparison with the person that they knew before, who was this incredibly dapper, charming, womanizing, incredibly beguiling character who was impulsive, who was absolute. And then in that process of the 27 years, he became this incredibly considered person who, when he came out, and you felt that when you sat next to him, he'd resolved all the issues in himself. We all sit with all these things going on in our head, and why didn't we do this, and why did we do this, and what do we do next? Mandela didn't have that, because he just had this one thing, and then when he wasn't on the one thing, he was on you. And that was transformative. I saw people's lives completely transformed by merely having an interaction with Mandela. And Sally's told you the story of her daughter, who had a similar experience with our daughter when I took her to see him. And you know, he wouldn't just sign his name in the book. He would say, "Dear Anna, you are going to be one of the leaders of this country." You know, he would inspire people wherever he went. So one doesn't, it's a fine line. One doesn't want to build him up as a saint or a spiritual being, but he had a very strong spiritual side, and that was, he also had a religious side, which he never ever talked about, but he did have a religious side. He was religious, but completely and totally privately. But he had this inner peace, this inner being at peace with himself, which, together with this total focus on the goal that he had to achieve, is what I believe made him an absolutely extraordinary person. And from everything I've heard about Bram Fischer, he was in a similar kind of category. And we have Joel Joffe with us tonight, who I have to say is one of the most remarkable people that I've met since I've been over here. So, to the panelists, a deep, deep gratitude from myself, from, I'm quite sure, from Chris Spring and Freddie Matthews, who's been wonderful in organizing this event, and it's been a pleasure to work with him. One of the books I didn't recommend, but there are 4 of them sitting over there, and I'm not recommending it because I co-authored it, so it wouldn't be appropriate. But it's a wonderful pictorial. No, I'm not trying to sell it. You'll see in a moment. And it has this wonderful photograph of Mandela in his later years standing in the Franschhoek Valley, which is absolutely extraordinary. So, Freddie, I want to give you one of these. So, if you'll please come up. Chris, you're going to have to remind me. Have I given you one already? No, you're getting one too. So So if anybody would like to take on those books, they're quite hard to come by these days. You can get it via Amazon for either a ridiculously high price, or if you look hard enough, for a low price. But if anybody would like to make a donation of £50 to the British Museum, they can walk away with one of those books. And I believe, Freddie, you said there's a box outside. So there's an honesty box. So you can take the book, drop your £50 in the box, or face the consequences. Thank you very much. I know some people have had to leave because we've gone over time, but you've been a wonderful audience, and I have to say an incredibly privileged audience to hear the speakers that we've had tonight. very much. We now go off into the night with lots to think about.